This is a snippet from a recent webcast on the KPI paradigm shifts of Pump, which I co-hosted with my Pump partner for the UK and Europe, Paul Frith. We explore paradigm shift number 3. Measures come from evidence, not data. Before performance measurement can align everyone to our strategic direction and strategy implementation, our thinking must change. Paul and I will walk you through the meaning and symptoms of another of the most important KPI paradigm shifts to make, that measures come from evidence, not data. And we'll share with you 3 questions to help trigger this shift in your organisation.
Okay, time for paradigm shift number 3. Our third paradigm shift is that measures come from evidence, not data. Now, at first, that's not going to sound right. Bear with me. Measures are evidence of our goals or our performance results or our objectives, and that's where we need to start to decide what's worth measuring. But too many people start by looking at the data they have available, and then they decide what they can measure using that data, and that is back to front. The point is, don't let your data decide what you measure. Instead, we need to start by deciding what evidence in the real world would convince us that our goals or objectives were happening or being achieved. That real world evidence is what we try to quantify to construct the most meaningful measures for our goals. Then, and only then, we look to see what data we need to implement those measures. So if you keep limiting what you measure by the data that you have available, you will never have the data you really need to achieve the goals that matter most. Of course, there are some symptoms for this, that this paradigm shift may not have occurred yet in your organization, or not enough, Paul?
All right, so the first symptom is that people are relying on ready-made measures or ready-made data, even from analytics tools or software, like could be Microsoft's Workplace Analytics or the Google Search Console, or, well, there's a whole host of tools and they all have it in them. But if we're doing this, someone hasn't done the hard work. It's now just easy to click some of these buttons that we've got, and there's a magnetic appeal to some of these ready-made measures that someone else has set up the data capture systems for. But these people don't really know our strategies that well and what's important within your actual organization, what we're trying to do. And so it never really fits. It never drives what we're looking for. The second symptom is people rely on traditional measures that have always been within the organization. And it's hard to let these things go, especially when there's nothing better to replace them. We get that. But there are so many historically important measures that stay in the spotlight long after their time has actually moved on. And simply because it's easier to keep them than to design something better that won't have immediate data, or that will be harder to actually get out there and collect or to calculate on a regular basis. And then the third symptom is that actually there's a huge number of performance dashboards out there that have lots of KPIs in there, but few of them directly relate to the goals of the organization and what they're trying to do. And often it's because a leadership team has a dashboard, rather than for asking statistically sound evidence of the important results. The vendor relies on the data the organization already has, and their dashboard tool then can automatically access it and get it up and running. But after a short while, those dashboards or those scorecards that we've created, they're not really used that much because the KPIs don't align to the actual strategic goals that we're trying to do. They just kind of sit there in the background with little interaction. As well as just the pre-built measures that we can buy off the shelf. There's also the data that is just automatically available, so we just go with it instead of actually scoping it and designing it to the measure that we'll really do. So it may not be an off-the-shelf measure in the way we're quite describing here, but it can be the ready-made data that's available that we just decide to measure instead of what's really going to feed back on the strategy. So again, I've seen that come up quite a lot recently with clients I'm working with. So it's something to keep an eye out for.
Now, the key to making this paradigm shift away from letting data decide what you measure and toward designing your measures based on evidence before you look to the data, the key is to raise awareness of the cost of not getting that new data that you need. Paul, please guide us through them.
Yeah, so the first question is definitely one of my favorites, to observe how often do we actually use the measures that we have. And again, even if you don't start a conversation with it, observe this actually happening in whatever you call your performance review meetings. How many measures are actually ignored completely or not talked about? How many of the measures that people have got or you've got within the team just lead to some kind of circular debate or no actual action? And how many measures actually distract the conversation away from the things that really do matter? So a great question to kick off with. Second question to have a think about, are we reporting impactful measures or is it just data? And one of the mantras we have as Pump partners that came from actually our colleague Mark down in Australia is that data is not measurement. Measurement uses data to produce insights or evidence about a result. So can you name the most insightful measures in your reports? And why is it that they are insightful? And then the third question to explore, how much time and money is spent reporting the data you don't use or you don't value? So you could calculate this, and you probably should. If you were to estimate how many people are involved in reporting performance data, how many hours a month they actually spend doing that, on average, estimate their average hourly wage. Doesn't matter if you get it wrong, I promise you. Estimate the percentage of what gets reported actually almost never gets used or taken action about. Multiply all that together and you get the cost of measures that aren't valuable. And if you did it, I promise you it'll shock you.
Sure will. David says, one of the projects in my organization has over 150 KPIs, but the higher ups only look at 5 of them. So David, you're probably ready to do this calculation. I did it with one of my clients for just one department in this organization. And the cost of all of that, using that formula that Paul just walked us through, the cost of all of those measures that were never used or not valuable was $500,000 Australian dollars every single year for years and years and years. So training just 10 people in that department in Pump would eliminate that cost in 6 months. And that's for less than 10% of what gets wasted in just a single year, let alone all of the years. So we'll leave you to ponder that.